Hello everyone, and welcome back to another chapter in Queering Twilight, the rebranding of the Twilight book to make it better. Or at least I hope that's what I'm doing. Some notes for this chapter. I did not like the idea that Charlie did not know how to feed himself. He is a grown-ass man, and he should be able to do at least that. This is one of the ways in which the Mormon Church perpetuates the idea of gendered roles, right? So, the women do the cooking and the men do the watching of the football in the other room while waiting for themselves to be fed. I do not like this stereotype. It's awful and harmful, and men should absolutely know how to cook for themselves. The other thing that I changed through here is I was not a fan of how hostile Edward was. It's another one of those really strange things where just a man who just impresses his will upon a woman in a way that she doesn't understand is actually very harmful and dangerous to her as a person, just completely boggles my mind every single time. Like, there's no reason for Bella to even like Edward. And you could say that this was arguably one of the first enemies to lovers in YA fiction, but I call bullshit. Just make him a genuinely nice person and you won't have to do this rigmarole. There's no need for Edward to be aggressive. There's no need for Bella to be afraid. So that's another point. I think that's everything that I can think of for the moment. So, without further ado, let us just get right into it. Chapter 2. Open Book. The next day was better, and worse. It was better because it wasn't raining yet, though the clouds were dense and opaque. It was easier because I knew what to expect of my day. Mike came to sit by me in English and walked me to my next class, with Chess Club Eric glaring at him all the while. That was nattering. People didn't look at me quite as much as they had yesterday. I decided to sit with the big group at lunch again, just to try and build some kind of routine. It was worse because Mr. Varner called on me and Trig when my hand wasn't raised, and I had the wrong answer. It was miserable because I had to play volleyball. The oddest thing, though, was Edward Cullen wasn't in school at all. All morning I looked for him, but when I walked into the cafeteria, I saw that his 4 siblings of sorts were sitting together at the same table, and he was not with them. Mike kept up an endless stream of chatter all during lunch, but I barely registered what he was saying. Later, Mike walked with me to biology, and I held my breath at the door, but Edward Cullen wasn't there either. I exhaled and went to my seat. Mike followed, talking about an upcoming trip to the beach. When the bell rang, he smiled at me, then sat down. It looked like I was going to have to do something about Mike, and it wouldn't be easy. In a town like this, where everyone lived on top of everyone else, diplomacy was essential. I had never been very tactful when it came to stating my wants and needs. My boundary setting was in shambles due to my mother's overbearing nature. The big question was when and how to do it. When the school day was finally done, and the horrors of sucking at volleyball were over, I changed quickly back into my jeans and navy blue sweater, and hurried from the girls' locker room, pleased to find that I had successfully evaded Mike for the moment. I walked swiftly out to the parking lot. It was crowded now with fleeing students. I got in my truck and began to leave, but in the rearview mirror, I noticed that Mike had finally emerged from the gym and was glancing around expectantly, no doubt waiting to see if I would magically appear. Bullet dodged. For now. As I backed carefully into a place in the line of cars that were waiting to exit the parking lot, I saw the two Cullens and the Hale twins getting into their car. It was the shiny new Volvo. It seemed excessive for them to have both looks and money, but as far as I could tell, life worked that way most of the time. It didn't look as if it brought them any acceptance here. No, I didn't fully believe that. The isolation must be their desire. I couldn't imagine any door that wouldn't be opened by that degree of beauty. They looked at my noisy truck as I passed them. I kept my eyes straight forward and was relieved when I was finally free of the school grounds. When I got home, I took my book bag upstairs, but before starting my homework, I changed into a pair of dry sweats, pulled my hair up into a ponytail, and checked my email for the first time. "Bella," my mom wrote, "write me as soon as you get in. Tell me how your flight was. Is it raining there? How was your first day of school? Please be sure to email me back before 5:30 p.m. today. Mom." I checked the clock. I still had an hour, but my mom was well known for jumping the gun. "Mom, everything is great. Of course it's raining. School isn't bad, just a little repetitive. Charlie bought me a truck. Can you believe it? It's old, but really sturdy, which is good, you know? I'll write again soon, but I'm not going to check my email every 5 minutes. Love you, Bella." I had decided to reread Wuthering Heights, the novel we were currently studying in English, for the fun of it. And that's what I was doing when Charlie came home. I lost track of the time, and I hurried downstairs. "Bella?" my father called out when he heard me on the stairs. Who else? I thought to myself. "Hey, Dad. Welcome home." "Thanks." He hung up his coat and stepped out of his boots before heading to the kitchen. "What's for dinner?" I asked excitedly. My mother was not the most imaginative cook, and her experiments weren't always edible. Charlie, on the other hand, was a decent cook, which was a relief because I hated cooking. Fried eggs and bacon were my specialties, besides instant ramen noodles. But I was also determined to earn my keep, and had insisted that I be assigned kitchen detail for the duration of my stay. He was willing enough to hand over the responsibility of washing dishes. He also informed me that if there was anything special that I ever wanted from the thriftway, to either add it to the list that was on the counter or just take the cash from the jar in the cupboard labeled food money. I had told him thanks, and that I definitely would if needed. "Steak and potatoes," he answered, as he grabbed the potatoes from the larder and began the process of washing them before wrapping them in foil. I felt awkward standing in the kitchen doing nothing. "Is there anything I can help with?" He looked at me thoughtfully, then said, "There's some greens in there. Do you think you could throw together a salad while I sauce the steaks?" "Sure," I said, and went to the fridge to find what was needed. While the steaks cooked and the potatoes broiled, I did my best to put together something that resembled a salad, complete with shredded carrots and sliced cucumbers. At one point, Charlie came over to check on me and gave a little wan smile. "Not bad, Bells," he said, and I wondered if he really meant it. "But perhaps I should show you how to better cut those carrots next time, okay?" My spirits sank a little, and he noticed. "It's not a chastisement," he said gently, "merely an observation." "Is it really that bad?" "Not at all," he continued. "You just need more practice, is all. Why don't you go set the table and I'll finish up in here?" Feeling a little better, I went to do as he asked, and soon I could smell the cooked meat and sizzling potatoes. I sniffed appreciatively. "Smells good, Dad." "Thanks," he said. We ate in silence for a few minutes. It wasn't uncomfortable. Neither of us was bothered by the quiet. In some ways, we were well suited for living together. "So, how did you like school?" Have you made any friends? He asked as he took seconds of my haphazard salad. Well, I have a few classes with a girl named Jessica. I sit with her at lunch, but I wouldn't exactly call us friends. I just sort of exist in her space, and she lets me, which is fine, I guess. And there's this boy, Mike, who's very... I hesitated over the word. Friendly. Everybody just kind of ignores me. I guess the new kid novelty has a low shelf life in this town. That must be Mike Newton. He seems like a nice kid. His family is, at least. His dad owns a sporting goods store just outside of town. He makes a good living off all the backpackers who come through here. Do you know the Cullen family? I asked suddenly. Dr. Cullen's family? Sure. He didn't elaborate, so I decided to pry a little further. The kids, are a little different. They don't seem to fit in well at school. Charlie nodded in agreement, which surprised me. People in this town don't always take to folks who are different, he muttered. I got the feeling there was something he wasn't saying. A private opinion that maybe he wasn't comfortable talking about. I decided to try my luck. Are the kids bad? He looked up at me, startled. Not at all. They are well behaved and polite. It's just their father I don't really care for. How come? Charlie chewed his steak thoughtfully, and I knew he was trying to figure out how to answer my question without putting ideas into my head. After he swallowed, he said, Never you mind about all that. It's grown-up stuff. Nothing for you to worry about. Ah, grown-up stuff. The things that parents say when they want to end a conversation. Oh, this was the longest talk that Charlie and I had had. That was a good sign, right? He must feel strongly about whatever he was thinking, so I decided to let it go. We lapsed back into silence as we finished eating. He cleared the table while I started on the dishes. Then Charlie went to the living room to watch TV, and after I finished washing the dishes by hand, I went upstairs to work on my math homework. That night, the rain finally stopped, and I fell asleep quickly, exhausted. My first weekend in Forks passed without incident. Without much to do, I cleaned the house, got ahead on my homework, and wrote my mom more bogusly cheerful emails. I did drive to the library on Saturday and found that it was poorly stocked, which was disappointing, but I decided to get a card anyway. If anything, I could have books routed in from either Olympia or Seattle. I had gotten used to the routine of my classes in the previous week, and by Friday I was able to recognize, if not name, almost all of the students at school. In gym, the kids on my team learned not to pass me the ball and to step quickly in front of me if the other team tried to take advantage of my lack of skills. I happily stayed out of their way. In English, Mike took his accustomed seat by my side. We had a pop quiz on Wuthering Heights. It was straightforward, very easy. All in all, I was feeling a lot more comfortable than I had thought I would feel by this point. When we walked out of class, the air was full of swirling bits of white. I could hear people shouting excitedly to one another. The wind bit at my cheeks, my nose. Wow, Mike said, it's snowing. I looked at the little cotton fluffs that were building up along the sidewalk and swirling erratically past my face. Ew. Snow. There went my good day. Mike looked back at me, and my face must have shown something of what I was thinking, because he said in a surprised tone, Don't you like snow? No. It means I have to drive in it later. Haven't you ever driven in the snow before? He asked incredulously. Have you? I asked sarcastically. California is just as dry as Arizona. Mike's ears turned slightly pink, but he laughed anyway. A slightly nervous laugh, I thought. And then a big squishy ball of dripping snow smacked into the back of his head. We both turned to see where it came from. I had my suspicions about Eric, who was walking away, his back toward us, in the wrong direction for his next class. Mike apparently had the same notion. He bent over and began scraping together a pile of white mush. "I'll see you at lunch, okay?" he said, his eyes on Eric's retreating figure. I nodded idly, not really interested in whatever private battle the boys were having. Eric didn't know me, and Mike wasn't too far behind him. Eventually, I would have to say something. In the cafeteria, everyone was chattering excitedly about the snow. Apparently, it was the first snowfall of the new year. I kept my mouth shut. Sure, it was drier than rain, until it melted in your socks. I walked alertedly to the cafeteria with Jessica after Spanish. Mush balls were flying everywhere. I kept a binder in my hands, ready to use as a shield if necessary. Jessica seemed to think this was hilarious, and I managed to dodge the snowball she lobbed at me just as I reached the cafeteria doors. Now only if I could be that agile during volleyball. Mike caught up to me as we walked through the doors, laughing, with ice melting the spikes in his hair. He and Jessica began talking animatedly about the snow fight as we got in line to buy food. I glanced toward that table in the corner, out of habit. Edward Cullen hadn't come back to school. Every day I looked for him with the rest of the Cullens, but he was nowhere to be seen. The others were laughing. Edward, Jasper, and Emmett all had their hair entirely saturated with melting snow. Alice and Rosalie were leaning away as Emmett shook his dripping hair towards them. They were enjoying the snowy day, just like everyone else. Only they looked more like a scene from a movie than the rest of us. But aside from the laughter and playfulness, there was something different, and I couldn't quite pinpoint what that difference was. I examined them more carefully. Their skin was less pale, I decided. Flushed from the snow fight, maybe. The circles under their eyes much less noticeable. I was still thinking about it as I paid for my food and sat down at my usual spot at the end of Jessica's table. The conversation taking place next to me mostly centered around a trip to the La Push Ocean Park in 2 weeks. Mike was putting it together and had invited me, and I had agreed to go, more out of politeness than desire. Beaches should be hot and dry, not wet and cold. I must have been too silent at some point because I heard Mike say, "Bella, what are you staring at?" I turned my head abruptly. "What? I'm sorry, were you saying something?" He looked at me, then over to where I was staring, and his eyes seemed to harden. "The Cullens don't like anybody. Well, they don't notice anybody enough to like them. So if you're thinking about befriending them, don't waste your time." That seemed a little harsh, and I opened my mouth to tell him so. But he just turned away from me and started telling those around us about an epic battle of the blizzard in the parking lot after school that he was planning and wanted everyone to join. I kept silent. I would have to hide in the gym until the parking lot cleared. For the rest of the lunch hour, I very carefully kept my eyes at my own table, not wanting Mike to have another reason to talk to me, which thankfully worked. I didn't really want to walk to class with Mike as usual. He seemed to be a popular target for the snowball snipers. But when we went to the door, everyone besides me groaned in unison. It was raining, washing all traces of the snow away in clear, icy ribbons down the side of the walkway. I pulled my hood up, secretly pleased. I would be free to go straight home after gym. I could hear Mike complaining loudly and took the opportunity to get to biology without him following me. Once inside the classroom, I saw Mr. Banner walking around the room, distributing one microscope and box of slides to each table. Class didn't start for a few minutes, and the room buzzed with conversation. I sat down at my usual table and kept my eyes away from the door, doodling idly on the cover of my notebook. Suddenly, I heard the chair next to mine move, and a quiet, musical voice said, "Hello." I looked up and was shocked to see Edward Cullen. He was sitting as far away from me as the desk allowed, but his chair was angled toward me. His hair was dripping wet, disheveled. Even so, he looked like he just finished shooting a commercial for hair gel. His dazzling face was friendly, if a bit shy, and a slight smile on his flawless lips. But his eyes were careful. "My name is Edward Cullen," he continued. "I didn't have a chance to introduce myself last week. You must be Bella Swan." My mind was spinning with confusion, and I couldn't think of anything conventional to say. "Hi," I stammered, then more clearly, "I am Bella." He smiled, a soft, enchanting smile. We lapsed into an awkward silence before he decided to continue. "It's too bad about the snow, huh?" "Not really," I answered honestly. "You don't like the cold?" It wasn't a question. "Or the wet." He smiled again. "Forks must be a difficult place for you to live," he mused. "You have no idea," I muttered darkly. Now he looked worried for some reason. "Why did you come here then?" No one had asked me that, not straight out like he did. "It's complicated." "Oh," he said. "Do you not want to talk about it? Because you don't have to tell me if you don't want to." I paused for a long moment, and then made the mistake of meeting his gaze. His dark gold eyes confused me, and I answered without thinking. "My mother sent me here," I said. "That doesn't sound so complex," he replied. "Her reasons were the complicated part." My voice sounded sad, even to me. "Oh?" Edward replied, sounding gently inquiring, his tone kind. I couldn't fathom his interest, but as he continued to stare at me with penetrating eyes, as if my dull life story was somehow vitally important, I decided to tell him. "She did it so that I wouldn't get any big town ideas." "Big town ideas?" he repeated, seeming even more confused. "Yes," I said, and felt disappointment that he didn't immediately understand my meaning. I glanced around to make sure that no one was in earshot before continuing. "See, there was this girl back home." But at that moment, the door opened, and the rest of the students started filing in. Edward quickly got up and retreated to his usual seat as Mr. Banner began talking. Mike gave me a sour look as he sat down next to me, but I ignored him. If he didn't like me talking to any other boy but him, he had another thing coming. Mr. Banner called the class to order then, and I turned with relief to listen. I thought about the brief conversation with Edward and was in disbelief that I'd started to open up. He'd seemed so engrossed in our conversation, and when I snuck a glance at the back of his head, I noticed that he was sitting perfectly still again, like a statue. I tried to appear attentive, as Mr. Banner illustrated with transparencies on the overhead projector, but my thoughts were unmanageable. When the bell finally rang, Edward again rushed as swiftly and as gracefully from the room as he had last Monday. And, like last Monday, I stared after him in amazement. Beside me, Mike began putting his books back into his backpack with unnecessary gusto. "Cullen seemed friendly enough today," he muttered under his breath as we shrugged into our raincoats. He didn't seem pleased about it. I tried to sound indifferent. "He was just introducing himself. It's not a reason to be upset." "Not upset," he retorted, and I couldn't help but to give him a blank stare. He made a dismissive sound and turned away from me again, muttering, "Whatever," before exiting the room. I felt my stomach give an unpleasant lurch. It wasn't that I was interested in Mike in the slightest, or had any intention of going after him to apologize. What for? I hadn't done anything wrong. But I also didn't relish the idea of having idle gossip spread about me when he and I were barely friends and certainly weren't dating. In gym, Mike was on the other team today, and I couldn't help but to notice that his generous way of playing had been replaced with aggressive gameplay. More than once he spiked the ball so hard in my direction that I thought it was going to hit me in the head. Luckily, I was good at dodging balls and was able to play keep away for most of the game, much to the annoyance of the people on my team. The rain was just a mist as I walked to the parking lot alone. That's when I noticed the still white figure. Edward Cullen was leaning against the front door of the Volvo, 3 cars down from me, and staring in my direction with a look of mild curiosity. Not in the mood for the antics of yet another boy, I opened my truck door and climbed inside the dry cab. I got the heater running, for once not caring about the mind-numbing roar of the engine. I unzipped my jacket, put the hood down, and fluffed my hair out so the heater could dry the ends on the way home. I looked around me to make sure it was clear before throwing the truck into reverse, and cautiously pulled out. I made it a point to stare straight ahead as I passed the Volvo, but from a peripheral peek, I would swear I saw him smiling softly in my direction. And that is all for this chapter, guys. So again, if you are enjoying this content, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe to the channel. And if you would like to support me monetarily, I have a Patreon and a Ko-fi. Both are linked in my About description here on YouTube. So again, thank you so much, guys, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.